Hello and welcome to this new Android development tutorial. This is part 2 on how to make a photo editor application for Android. Right, so in the previous part we did some basic initialization stuff. In this part we will check for permissions programmatically. So we'll start with that, and to do that we will do the following. So inside the onResume method we want to check if we have or not permission to request enabled, right? And we don't have them enabled, we will request them to the user, right? So we will do the following. So we will create a method that will enable us to know if permissions are or not allowed, right? So first, before the onResume method, we will define the actual permissions we want. To request permissions, we need what's called a request code that will be an identifier of the permissions we are requesting to the user, right? So to create that code, we're gonna say private static final int, which is an integer. We'll call this request permissions, okay, and we will assign a arbitrary value to this. I will assign 1, 2, 3, 4 because it doesn't really matter which value as long as you assign one value, right? And next we will define the permissions using an array of strings. So we go and say private static final string, oops, it's capital S, string array, and we will call this string array permissions. So permissions, okay, and we will set these to the following. So we say equals, we open brackets, we end the last bracket with a semicolon, and between these two brackets we will do type the following: manifest dot permission dot read external storage, right? And that will be the first permission because that is the read external storage permission. We also want the write external storage permission. So you can say manifest dot permission dot write external storage. So now we have defined the permissions our app requires to function, right? So now what we will do is we will check if we have or don't have permissions. For the purpose of this checking, we will do a negative check. Okay, so we will create a method right here and we will call it private boolean not permissions. I will call it not permissions, which means we don't have permissions, right? And this method will return true if we don't have permissions, and it will return false if we have permissions, right? So what we will do here is the following. You're gonna create a for loop. So you're gonna say for int I equals 0, I is less than, we have to define the permission count too. So after we define the permission right here, we're going to define the permissions count, which is the number of permissions we are requesting. So private static final int permissions count, and this will be set to 2 because we're requesting 2 permissions, right? So if we go again into the Boolean method of not permissions, we will check if I is less than permissions count, right? And we'll do I plus plus. So this is a for loop. If you don't know how for loop works, then you can just copy what I just have wrote, right? So this is a for loop. And now we will do a check inside the for loop. So we will do the following. We will do and say if check, oops, uppercase, sorry, this should be lowercase. So if check self permission, okay, and we will call this with the parameters with permissions. Okay, that's an array, and we will get the element index I. So permissions at I. So if check self permissions, this is different than package manager that permission granted. Okay, if it's different than permission granted, we will return true. Okay, and if we end the for loop without returning true, it means that we actually have permissions granted, so we will return false. Okay, so easy. As you can see, we have a warning right here that tells us call requires API level 23, current minimum is 19. So this will be only called in 23, right? So we will ignore this. So you're gonna click here and we will click on suppress, add suppress linked API annotation, because we will only call this method only when it is safe to call it, right? Okay, so that is our not permissions method. Now we have to use it, right? So to use that not permissions method, we go inside the onResume method and we will type if not permissions. So it is very important that we check if we have permissions inside the onResume method. Why? Well, because the user, even if the user has allowed permissions when he just installed the app, later the user can disable permissions if he goes to settings and it will search your application and will disable permissions, right? So the onResume method, we will have to check them again to make sure we still have those permissions, right? So basically, if not permissions is true, which means we don't have permissions, we will say request permissions. So we're going to say request permissions, okay? And what we will pass to this method will be the permissions we want to request and our request code, which is called request permissions, okay? So let's do just that. So we'll pass permissions as the first parameter, so it's capital permissions, okay? And the second parameter will be request permissions, as you can see. So this is basically how we request permissions. And again, this tells us that here API level requires 23, okay? But here we will actually do a check. So right here, we will click on this warning sign and we will click on surround with if version SDK int is greater or equal than marshmallow, okay? But this will be a bit inefficient to do, right? So we will check this before, right? So basically we will do that in the first if statement. So we will do this as follows. We will do and basically copy what's on the second if. We'll copy that into the first if. So we're gonna say build that version that SDK int if is greater or equal than build that version codes that m. Okay, and here we will use an AND operator, which is a double ampersand. Okay, and here we check. So we're checking if the SDK int, which means if the Android version is marshmallow or greater, and we don't have permissions, please check it. Okay, so we don't need the inner if like right here. So we can delete that inner if. So this way, so make sure you have the same as as I have here, right? So this way is a more efficient way of checking permissions, because we are only calling permission check and request permission only if it is API 23 or Marshmallow and above, right? So that's a lot more efficient. Okay, so now that we have requested permissions, we want to know if the permissions were granted or not. Okay, so we will check that just now. So we're going to call add override, and here I will do public void on request permissions result. I will open parentheses and will start typing int request code, which is the first parameter. The second one will be string array. Okay, this will be permissions, and the third parameter will be int array, and this will be the grant result. So if the permissions were granted or not, we can check that using the grant results, right? So we will open this method, and what we will do now is that we will call the super method of this request permission result. So to do that, we can say super dot on request permissions result, and we will pass the same parameters we received. We will send it here, right? So we're gonna send request code, comma, permissions, comma, grant results, right? So that's how we override the on request permissions result method, right? So now that we have overridden it, we want to check the permissions state, basically if the user granted or denied permissions, right? So we're gonna do the following. I'm gonna say if request code equals to request permissions. So if we are actually getting the results for what we asked for, and here I'll say and grant result that length is greater than 0. So we're basically checking if grant result is not empty. So that's how we do it. And now, if we have permissions, we don't really have to do anything. But if we don't have permissions, we have to close the application, because the application cannot work without those permissions, right? So to close the application, we will first check if not permissions. This means the user has not granted permissions. We will basically be closing the app, right? To close the app in a way that the application can keep asking permissions every time the app is opened, we will do the following. We will create two parentheses. Inside the innermost parentheses, we will go and type activity manager. So activity, let me check, activity manager, okay. And outside that parentheses, we're gonna say this dot get system service, and we will pass activity service. Okay, and outside these two parentheses, I'll type dot clear application user data. So basically, these will clear the application data. And when we clear the application data, what we're doing is we are enabling ourselves, our app in this case, to keep asking permissions as long as it needs. And then we're gonna say recreate, which basically means exit in this context, right? So this is how this will work basically, and this is how permissions are requested in Android. So now we will run the application on the emulator to check if it's actually requesting permissions or not. Okay. So as you can see, here we have a photo editor, and here here is a dialog that says allow photo editor to access photos, media and files on your device, and here you have deny or allow. If you click on deny, the application will be closed, right? Now if we open the application again, which is photo editor, let me search for it, photo editor, okay? If we open it again, it will keep asking for permissions until the user allows the permission. So if the user clicks on allow, then the application will stay open and the user can start using it. So that's basically how we request permissions in Android. So now that we have, right now we are running and we know that we have the permissions we need. So we can continue to check about this. So we will go back to our main activity.java, and what we will do here is that we will initialize call init after the onCreate method, right? Okay, so we have created the init method right here. As you can see, this method right here, and we have to initialize this on the onCreate method. So after we set this to gone, we can initialize it. Actually, what I will do is I will move this if statement inside the initialize method, right? So I'll move that if statement inside the init method. Okay, so here we have it, and from inside the onCreate method I will call the init method, right? So now we can start working only on our init method. So the first check, as I told you, was to check if the device has the camera feature, so if the device has camera. And if it doesn't have camera, we don't have to initialize the take photo button, right? So we can change this right here, okay? But for simplicity reasons, we will just leave it as it is, right? Later we can maybe optimize this a bit more. So right now we will be focused inside the on-click listener of the select image button. So basically what we want to do when the select image button is clicked, we want to enable the user to select an image that is stored on the device, right? So to do that, we will create an intent. Okay, so say final intent, and I will call it, oh, don't forget to import the intent class. I will call it intent, okay? And I'll set this to new intent, and I will set this to intent dot action get content, right? So that will be my first intent, and then I'm gonna say intent dot set type, and I'll set this type to image because we want to receive images, and we want to receive actually any image we can, so you're gonna say image slash asterisk. So there we are specifying what kind of files will the intent be opening. Now we will create another intent, so you can say final intent. We'll call this peak intent, okay? And we will set this to new intent, open parenthesis, intent dot action actions of peak, okay, action peak. So what this will enables us is to create the options from which we can create it. We can get images. Maybe we can get it using a gallery application or a file manager application. So whatever the case may be, right? So this is the peak intent. Okay, so we're gonna say peak intent dot set data and type. Okay, oops, so this set the data and type, and I will pass what we will pass to this method will be the following: will be Android dot provider dot media store dot images dot media dot external content URI, right? So this is how we set this. Oh, we also have to set the type of things. So we're gonna say comma right here and set double quotes image slash asterisk, right? So this is how we set data and type of our action peak intent, of our peak intent. Now we're gonna create our chooser intent. We will actually enable us to choose the photo itself. So you can say final chooser intent. Oops, it's an intent, so you have to tell that first. So final intent chooser intent. Okay, and I'll set this to intent dot create chooser, and what I'll pass here will be first just my original intent, which is called intent, and then I will pass the title of the intent. In this case, I will tell it to say select image, right? Okay, and after I do this, well, this is actually for this, so we can close this line and the line with a semicolon, okay? And then what we have to do is we say start activity for result, okay? And what we'll do here will be chooser intent, okay, comma, request pick image. So we have to create a global code the same way we created the code for the request permissions. We go create a request pick image, right? So you can say outside this method, we're gonna type private static final int, and we'll call this request pick image, right? And I'll set this to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the previous one was 1, 2, 3, 4, and this one will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the only condition is that those two are different, right? Okay, and we go back to our chooser intent, and what we will pass here will be request pick image. So request pick image. So when we do this, the Android API will request an image chooser for our application, right? So, but when we do that, we also have to receive the answer of that request. So just to show you, I will run this app as it is right now, just to let you see how this works. So we have our photo editor right here, and it's not asking for permissions because in the previous launch we already granted the permissions. So if we click on select image, what will happen is, as you can see right here, it opens the file manager and asks us to select images. Now, if you have more than one file manager, it may tell you which file manager you want to use or which gallery application you want to use. So it really depends. And here what we will do is, of course, the user will select an image like this one right here. And now the system has sent that image to us, but we have not handled it yet, right? So we have to receive that image after we asked for an image, but we want now have to listen for the system as we want to receive the image. So we will do just that. After the init method, we will do the following, okay? So what we will do here will be the following. So we will say override, and we will override public void on activity result. Okay, and what I'll pass to this method will be int request code. So this is kind of the similar when we overwritten the onRequest permissions result. The second one will be int result code. Okay, and the third one will be intent data, right? So we will open this method and we will call superclass. So you can say super dot on activity result, and what we will pass to this method first will be request code, then it will be result code, and then it will be data, which is our intent, right? So this method will be called and will be passed the image the user selects. So here is where we select the image. So first of all, inside this, we will check if the result was successful, right? So to check if it was successful, we're gonna say if result code is different than result okay. So if it's different than result okay, we will return. Which means if it's not okay, we should not keep executing more code. We should just return, right? Okay. And if the now we have to check if the request code is the code we sent, right? So to check if the request code is the code we sent, we're gonna do the following. So before doing that, actually, let's create this take photo button, okay? Because that will also be returned through here. And since we don't want to repeat ourselves, right? So we want to create this take photo. We want to implement this take photo button. So it's very similar that what we did here, but now we will do it here on the take photo button, right? So we will go to the onClick method and we will create a new intent. It will be final intent. It will be take picture intent, right? And I will set this to new intent media store dot action image capture, because we want to capture an image, right? Then what we will do is the following. We're gonna say if take photo, take picture intent, we called it. So take picture intent dot resolve activity, and we will pass here get package manager. So, and we will check if all of this is different than a null, okay? We will do the following. If it's different than null, we will create a photo file. But if it is null, what we will do is we will basically tell the system that the camera application is not compatible. So to tell the user that his or her camera application is not compatible, we will use what is a toast. So remember, inside the if one, here I will create a comment, and here we will create a file for the received, for the select, for the photo that was just taken. So we will do that later. But now what we will do is we'll show a toast. So you're gonna say toast that make text, and what will pass here will be main activity that these, okay? And what we want the toast to say, which is a message that appears to the user, will be your camera app is not compatible or non-existence, but maybe the app doesn't exist, but for now we will just tell it it's not compatible, right? So that's how we do this. Oops, but we have to use an extra parameter right here, so comma, and we're gonna say toast that length short, and after this parenthesis you're going to say that show. So you can test this. When your camera application is not compatible, this toast message will be shown. Okay, in the next video we will continue with these, and we will be on activity result, and we'll actually be able to receive photo from both the gallery and from the camera. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I see you in the next one. Bye.